system. So I wanted to introduce myself. I have some colleagues that are also some developer advocates with me. So there's Patrick and Svetlana, if you guys want to introduce yourselves as well. Yeah.
Sure. So my name is Patrick Kitzler. Like Pooja was saying, so I'm a developer advocate as well, but I'm focusing on an open source software. And what's so special about the software, and that's one of the reasons why I'm heavily involved here, is open source software isn't really owned by anyone, right? So anybody who's interested in a particular, let's say, tool, utility, program, can contribute to the documentation, to the source code. And so open source software is basically built by a community, right? And it's a welcoming community to members of any kind of background, right? So if somebody wants to contribute documentation, if somebody wants to contribute code to projects that they're interested in, that's what I really like about working as an advocate in this area. And today, at the end of this session, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the open source projects that we have related to this challenge here.
Sounds good.
Hi, and I'm Svetlana Levitan. I'm also a developer advocate on the same team as Patrick. I specialize more in machine learning and open standards for predictive model deployment. And I'm located in Chicago and often organize meetups here in Chicago. I work with Chicago ML Group and Big Data and AI developers and several other groups in Chicago. And I highly recommend you to attend meetups. Nowadays, all the meetups are virtual, which is kind of convenient. You can attend those which are far away from you easily. No need to travel. And I will show you some of the IBM products and today that you could use in this hackathon. Thank you.
Awesome. So I wanted to get started by just kind of introducing you all to IBM Cloud, and a lot of the services that we offer, and to help you guys get a jump start on some projects, as well as help you inspire you on some things that you could use, especially if you have a few ideas. So I'm going to go share my screen, and we can walk through a few things together. So before we kind of jump into some of the projects that IBM has to offer, I wanted to kind of talk to you guys all about why IBM. So with IBM products and services, you'll see on the IBM Cloud that we have all of these different services, and a lot of these services have light accounts, which are basically accounts that let you play with these services and use these services for free. So for example, if you wanted to build an application with, that has some sort of chatbot element, you can use a chatbot service, which is on IBM Cloud called Watson Assistant. I'll be diving a little bit deeper into what that looks like, but that's a free service that we have that's available as a light service. If you wanted to do something with images, we have visual recognition. We have things to process language. We have some databases that you can use. If you wanted to prototype really quickly, you can use a service called Node-RED, and this one is really fun as well. And I can kind of jump into that, especially at a hackathon when you're trying to build things in a quick way. You might want to show what an end-to-end service looks like in Node-RED. And also, if you're trying to build some APIs, you might want to think about using serverless as an option. We have an IoT platform for those of you who are working with IoT, Raspberry Pis or any IoT services. This lets you manage your IoT data. And then finally, we have a lot of things in the data science space. So for example, if you wanted to build some models, there's ways that you can build a model automatically without, writing a bunch of Jupyter notebooks or things like that using auto AI. And if you wanted to get a little specific and clean some data, you could use Jupyter notebooks and pandas and different libraries. We have dashboards that help you, visualize your data, as well as machine learning services that help you kind of, train the data that you've deployed. So as you can see, there's a lot of options here and within IBM Cloud, and for you to kind of build things off of. So, especially if you're looking for how to get started, there's a lot here to kind of go through. So where do you find exactly like where to get started? So the one big thing I wanted to show you guys is called the IBM code patterns. I know a lot of you guys are, hackathons can be really intimidating. You might feel like, oh, am I supposed to build something from scratch? Well, in a way, like, the best way to build something and learn something is to actually see how something else is built. And basically with IBM code patterns, it gives you a library of resources and projects that you can actually kind of take forward instead of trying to build something from scratch. So where do you find these IBM code patterns? So basically, if you just Google developer.ibm.com, I think I shared that within the resources channel, developer.ibm.com. You can basically see code patterns for anything you're interested in. So let's say I'm interested in, building something using Node.js. So I'll just click on Node.js or search for Node.js. And there's all of these different kinds of projects. For example, if I look at tutorials, there's different tutorials on how what you can do with Node.js. For example, you can introduce AI within Node.js. I really like actually looking at some of the visual recognition code patterns. There's some really great examples there. So for example, visual recognition, if I were to just search that, you could basically, you could, do so many different things with visual recognition, and these are all different tutorials, articles, videos. So for example, if you wanted to, have a beginner's guide to setting up a service, you can look at the code pattern here. And a lot of these include Git repos as well. So for example, if I were to look at just like tutorials, or if I were to just filter by, I think I'm filtering all of them, but let's look at like a different, like a analytical dashboard. I think some of these you can actually get the code right here, which points you to a GitHub repo, which you could clone and then download and then see how you could build something using those tools. So it's a really great resource especially for those of you who are interested in building things. And I have some really great examples, especially on the Slack channel that I posted. So you feel free to check out some of these examples, especially while you're trying to build some of your projects. So I wanted to jump into one service specifically. So I'm going to actually talk a little bit about ChatBots, and I think Svetlana is going to jump into and talk a little bit more about visual recognition and some of the AI services. But I wanted to show you how to work with chatbots on IBM Cloud. So let's dive a little bit with chatbots. So what does that mean? So basically, chatbots within IBM Cloud are called Watson Assistant. And there's these concepts called skills. And basically what happens is you have to create this thing called a skill, and you actually have to give it a couple of different things. So the one thing that you'll have to give is an intent. So an intent is basically anything that I think someone is chatting in the chat. Are people? Oh, okay, sorry. I think, so basically an intent is anything that someone asks about. So for example, if you wanted to build like a pizza ordering chatbot, you know, maybe your customer might ask like, you know, what kind of toppings do you have, you know? And so basically you have to, when you create chatbots, you need to kind of talk about the different intents that a customer will be asking. And then along with that, you know, there's also a catalog, especially if, depending on what kind of business or what kind of use case you're trying to target. There's already a pre-created catalog of possible intents that you might want to use, especially depending on what your use case is. Like for example, if banking is your use case, you might want to check out the content catalog about different intents involving banking. But you know, ideally, when you create intents, you want to basically keep the user in mind or keep your customer in mind, especially if you're trying to create some sort of messaging app where you're communicating information. You want to think about what would someone ask. And after thinking about what someone would ask, you also want to think a little bit about what is the age limit for Watson? I can answer that a little bit later. Let me just put the Zoom chat right here. So, so I think overall, essentially, you want to talk a little bit about inside of intents. There's also these things that you want to keep in mind, which are the variables within your intent that you care about. So, for example, you might care about a location, like when somebody is asking about like where is XYZ store located, or where is that pizza shop located. You might care about like, you know, the kind of location someone's interested in, or, you know, basically some sort of variable within that ask that everybody that your chatbot could particularly care about. And these things could include like location, phone numbers, and some of these are already pre-created entities. So these are things that you might not have to set up. So you could always look at you know, create your own entities or look at some of the entities that are provided. So some of these entities that are provided are called the system entities. So for example, I talked a little bit about location and currency. So anytime you want to create some sort of chatbot that, you know, maybe you talk a little bit about money or about, you know, dates and times, you might want to enable some of these system entities. And then finally, once you have your entities and your intent set up, you have to set them all up in this thing called the dialog tree. And I'll show you what all this looks like in a sample application. But essentially what happens here is this is a dialog where you're going to set up like, you know, how somebody is going to have a conversation. So for example, you might want to open up with a welcoming message like, hello, good morning, greetings, like welcome to XYZ, you know, service. And then if somebody asks about, in this case, hours of operations, like when are you open, then you might want to set up some sort of dialogue. If somebody asks that intent, when are you open, how should that respond? So, and then in here you can see that someone is also setting up a dialogue about directions, locations, making an appointment. So essentially, once you have your intents and your entity set up, you want to bring all of those things together and you want to put them into some sort of dialogue tree. And then finally, you want to keep in mind that dialogue trees work in a node fashion. So you actually have to, you know, it's processed by like the first node, and then it goes down. So for example, this condition has to be met, and then it could go down to this condition. So if you think about a dialogue tree, for those of you who have taken some programming classes, this is kind of like a sophisticated if-else statement. So if this condition happens, then you get this response. Then if this condition happens, then you get either this child response or this response, or then you can get this condition. So it goes in a downward fashion. So when you create a dialogue tree, make sure that you keep in mind the order of how people would ask something. So for example, if somebody asks something about location, then you could have a child node about something else on location, like where I guess I'm having a hard time coming up with this example on the fly, but like if somebody asks about like hours of operation, then you could have like a child node about different stores and what hours they're open. So I hope that kind of makes a little bit of sense, but I think it'll make a little bit more sense once I show you an example. So I wanted to show you one example that our team and myself included. We created the starter kit, and I know right now a lot of you guys are working and probably going to school remotely. And the one big thing with this COVID pandemic is that we all need is, being able to communicate and get the right information across. So I'm sure you guys can all imagine, a lot of people are asking very similar questions during this time about, what are the certain symptoms involved for COVID, where can they get tested, how many people have been affected. If you can imagine the world asking all of these questions, you could see that if they're calling like a hotline, or if they're calling somebody about that you could see that could get really populated really fast. So one way to kind of, combat that is through creating a COVID communications chatbot. And that's what my team here did with this starter kit. So I'm going to post this starter kit in the chat, as well as I think we posted this also in your Slack channels. And so take a look at this starter kit, and we can show you kind of how to get started. But the first thing what you'll need to do is we have some of these things called like, we have architectural diagrams. So we've actually basically made the chatbot using Watson Assistant, but we integrated it with different technologies. So for example, this integration is using Node.js as the front end. So this is creating a Node app using our Watson Assistant chatbot. Here, we're using Slack for our front end as our Watson Assistant chatbot. And I don't know how many of you guys were using Slack right now to do this hackathon, but you could also create a chatbot that integrates with Slack that people can interact with. And then finally, the last integration we talked about is Node-RED. And I'm going to show you a little bit what all kind of three look like, but basically this is where you can kind of set up your chatbot to integrate with the Node-RED user interface. So the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to set up an instant of Watson Assistant. So I want to kind of walk you guys through a little bit about the IBM Cloud Catalog. So let me jump back a little bit. So the first thing that you'll need to do to access the IBM Cloud Catalog is you're going to need to sign up for an IBM Cloud account. So, take a look at this slide. I'm also going to put it in the chat. So if you click on this link here, this will take you to a sign-up page. And once you sign up for IBM Cloud, you should be able to see basically this. This is what it looks like from the inside. So you should see this, and this is where you're going to be able to access some of these services. So, for example, if you wanted to use Watson Assistant, the best place to use Watson Assistant is you can go to Catalog, And I want to talk a little bit about the catalog because there's a lot of services on here that you might need, or that you might be interested in looking into. So for example, if you just click on services and you look at just like the light account services, these are all services that you can actually create right now for free, pretty much. So you can see that there's so many different services. We can filter by AI services. So for example, Watson Assistant is a free AI service. Watson Studio, which Svetlana and Patrick will be talking about a little bit later, is also one. You can create a free service of Watson Studio. There's Discovery. There's language translator. So for those of you guys who might be creating projects involving like translating some language, you might be interested in that. Personality insight, there's something called speech to text. So if you're capturing voice data and you want to convert it to some text, you could use this service. Or if you have text data and you want to convert that to speech, you could use that service. Tone analyzer is a fun one where you can actually analyze the tone, like whether something sounds like it's happy or sad or joy or whatever it's expressing. You can use tone analyzer. Svetlana is going to talk a little bit more about VisRec, but you could see that there's all of these really great services for you all to use. I think with the Lite account, you can only create 4 services at a time. Feel free to correct me on that, Svetlana and Patrick. But I think when you create your first IBM Cloud account, you can create 4 services at a time. But let's jump into Watson Assistant, because that's what we're going to be using today to create our chatbot. So I already have an instance of Watson Assistant created, but once you've kind of created an IBM Cloud account, gone to the catalog, and found Watson Assistant, you want to click on this Lite service. You want to give your Watson Assistant a name, and then you can just click Create. And that way, you should have a Watson Assistant service created. So once you go back to your IBM Cloud, like go back to your home, and then go to your dashboard, you should be able to see what that service looks like. So I have created a ton of services because I've played around with IBM Cloud a lot. But this is what my assistant service looks like. So I created this a while back ago. And basically now if I click Launch Watson Assistant, this is where all of my assistants live. So I've created a couple of different chatbots. So I've created this Bee Travels chatbot. I can show you guys what that looks like, but this is a travel bot that I created. But for this COVID crisis chatbot, I wanted to show you guys what that looks like. So we mentioned a little bit, I talked to you guys a little bit about these things called skills. So basically what these are this is where you build your entire chatbot. So here I've created this thing called the CDC COVID FAQ. So you can either create this absolutely from scratch, or you could import it. So to import a skill, so in my example, the one really great thing with this Git repo is that there's a lot of things that you might not have to ever do from scratch. We've already kind of set that up for you. So if you go to Starter Kit and then go to Assistant, you could see that this thing called Skill CDC COVID, it's basically a bunch of JSON. So it's a bunch of JSON text on all the data that we've collected. And I talked a little bit about intents, like things that someone would ask, like, why is COVID-19 the name for this disease? We've actually gotten all of these questions from the CDC website, and we've actually used all of this. So it's pretty accurate, especially if you want to, do something around COVID and data around building a chatbot around COVID. So for example, there's this one chatbot called hand washing tips. That's an intent, hand washing guidance. There's a ton of data here. So all you really need to do to basically get this chatbot skill working is you actually need to import it. So you could do that by, the first thing what you'll need to do is you'll need to click on create an assistant. You'll want to give this assistant a name, like let's say COVID chatbot, create assistant. And then you want to add a dialogue skill. And you could either import a skill from a JSON file. So I'm actually not going to do this right now because I've already imported the skill, but actually, let's see if I can. So yeah, so I'm going to want to, let's see, desktop. I think I've created this a little bit before. Where is this? Dev advocate content. Hold on. Let me just show you. So what you can do is I'm gonna take the starter communication skill. I'm gonna download this file, and I'm gonna. So I have it downloaded, and now I'm gonna put that downloaded file. It's actually it's downloading right now. I think I have a version of it already created. I have a lot of stuff in my computer. Let's see, just a second. Okay, so so that's the file. So if I go to starter kit, assistant, and then I can actually import the skill. So what you're going to want to do is let's see. So let's go back to this. So you're going to basically want to import this skill. So choose a JSON file. So starter kit, assistant, and then the JSON. And if you click open, you can import it. I think I already, yes. Okay, so it let me import this skill. So, which is great. So this means that, you know, all of the data around this chatbot is imported into your Watson assistant, especially if you wanted to play around with this. And if you guys missed that, all of the steps on how to do that are all documented here. So click import skill, choose JSON file, and import the file. This is going to take a little bit of time to train. So let me just show you the old assistant that I had created. So here, once we click inside, I talked to you guys a little bit about intents, entities, and dialogues. So here, basically, all the intents that we have are things that people would ask. So let's look at this animal contact intent. So for example, someone might ask, can I get COVID for my pet? Can I get this for my cat? Can I get this for my dog? So basically anything that someone might ask involving animal contact, that is part of that intent. So for example, another intent that we've talked about is children and face masks. Can my child play outside without a mask? You know, so basically when anybody asks these questions, we have a certain response around that answer. So once you have these intents set up, as you can see here, we have tons of intents that we've set up, and we've scraped these all from like the CDC FAQ page. And so once you have all of these intents set up, especially if you're trying to create a chatbot on your own, you want to make sure you have enough intents that you know, your chatbot can kind of understand and get stronger with that kind of data. So make sure you have a lot of different examples, especially for a certain topic, like for example, what is COVID? I think I have 13 different examples of how someone could ask, what is COVID? And make sure you use like different spelling ways, different grammatic ways. This is just going to help your Watson assistant kind of get stronger and like understand what you mean. And the way it does that by the use of natural language processing. So it understands the NLP in the phrase to kind of build that conversation a little bit more stronger. So after you have the intent, the next thing you want to kind of keep in mind is entities. So entities are basically, I think I told you guys a little bit earlier, they're like the variables that we care about within somebody's ask. So for example, we care about the word coronavirus in this scenario. We care about, so like some of these synonyms to this word is corona, check, virus. You could see that the word corona with the K is also used. Sometimes people don't spell that word perfectly, but you still want somebody to know what they mean by that. COVID is a term that's also used multiple times. And then let's say, we also have an intent called school type. So for example, like college, grade school, high school. So maybe there's an intent out there that we care about what kind of schools that, you know, that somebody is part of, and we have some sort of conversation around, you know, like middle schoolers or high school action, you know, things with COVID. So so once you have a lot of that, I wanted to also show a little bit of system entities. So some of these things that we have toggled on, for example, numbers. That means if anyone types like a number, like if someone asks in here, like how many people are affected, they know that the answer will be probably a number. So that's something that, you know, is an intent, an entity that, you know, we've turned on, and as well as location and person. So let's jump into what this looks like at the end. So this basically turns into a giant dialog tree. So once you have installed this, you can see that we have this first dialog tree that's basically our welcome tree. And, you know, we can jump into, I think I just showed this as an example. Let me delete this one node. Actually, yeah. But this basically, you get a welcome and then you get a greeting. So if anyone types like, hi, hello, good morning, goodbye, it'll say, hello, I'm the COVID crisis communication bot ready to answer your questions. How can I help you? So the one really fun thing you could do is you can try it out. So before you like, you know, install this app somewhere, you can try this out. So for example, right when we set up this bot, it says, hello, I'm the COVID crisis bot. So if I say hi again, it'll know that I basically had a greeting. Let's say if I said good morning. So it recognizes the word good morning as a greeting, right? So let's say something like goodbye. Farewell. So it jumps to this node where it says, farewell, take care, stay safe out there. So when you want to end a conversation, you know, you could say, it's what you would say. But let's ask it some question here. So let's ask, what is coronavirus? So basically what happens here is it's giving us the response of what is COVID. So basically, if anybody asks what is COVID, it will respond to with this text. So I wanted to just point out one thing now that I'm walking through this. Every intent is set up with this thing called a hashtag. So a hashtag and then the name of the intent. That is, Watson Assistant recognizes that as an intent. However, entities are recognized with the @ symbol. So in this scenario where we asked, what is coronavirus? You could see that this blue coronavirus is highlighted because it recognizes that as an entity. And so you could see that entity is highlighted, but it jumps to this intent in the dialog tree where it's written as this intent. If Watson Assistant recognizes what is COVID as the intent, and here they're talking a little bit about confidence scores. So with NLP, there's this concept of confidence scores. So how sure is it that it's asking about this particular subject? So in that scenario, just a second. Okay, so in that scenario, it wants to be sure like that's the exact intent that they're asking. If it recognizes this, then it's going to respond with this particular text. So for example, what is coronavirus? It responds with this particular text. So let's ask another question. Let's ask something. Does anyone have any specific questions? If you guys have a question, feel free to type in the chat and I can ask it here. And that way, so you can ask, you can get an idea. But I'm going to ask something about pets. Can I get COVID from my pet? So here it recognized that I'm talking about animal contact. So the one good thing is that if you click on it, it tells you exactly where what your intent is, and then it gives you the answer based on that. Is it safe? Let's do something about middle school, students, schools, and meals. Are schools giving out meals? So this knows that it's talking about meals for students. So it gives us the answer, check with your school on plans to continue meal service. So as you can see, I hope this kind of gives you an idea of how like a chatbot is created and how you can create one for your services, for your projects. The one really interesting thing after you've kind of created this chatbot is integrating it with in different ways. So I wanted to show you one more thing. So I wanted to show you that that in this one thing that we've also kind of set up with this particular chatbot is we've set up this thing called webhooks. So basically this webhook lets us access data. So for example, one piece of data that we care about is like how many different people are affected. So if we ask how many people are affected, you can see that we can get like the total cases, the total deaths, the total recovered. And this data, this is not static data. This is actually pretty dynamic data. So there's an API that we're hitting that gives us this total count number every time that we are, setting this up. So we've done this in a special way. We've done this using a thing called a serverless cloud function. So back on your IBM Cloud, there's this thing called functions. So if we click on functions, we've created this thing called an action where we basically set up the, I think I have it here. Maybe I don't have it created. Yeah, I don't think I have this action created to show you guys. Yeah, I think so. I don't think I can show you this right now because I haven't created this yet. But if you look into some of these instructions, it'll show you exactly how to like set up a webhook. And we use this thing called Watson Discovery, which is another IBM API, IBM service to get news articles especially. So in our Watson Assistant chatbot, we also have set up like news, like daily news about COVID. So if we ask what is in the news, we can see that we get some news articles. For example, like I think this one is by the Jerusalem Post, and we get some different news articles about this subject. So that's one really great thing. I wanted to show you the last thing is that we've also integrated. So I've actually integrated this with Slack. So for those of you who are interested in seeing what that looks like, let me show you. So let's see, one second, I have double screens. So let's go to this. Okay, so here you could see that I've integrated the entire chatbot with Slack. So you could see that it's no longer on Watson Assistant. It's actually living in Slack, and you can interact with it in Slack. So, for example, hello, you can ask it different questions like, what are some symptoms? And, you know, what is in the news? And you could see that it's going to give me different different news articles for this particular situation. And so yeah, and I hope this kind of gives you a lot more of an idea. So I wanted to show you that. So all the instructions to integrating it with Slack, integrating it with a webhook, integrating it with Node-RED. I'm going to show you Node-RED a little bit. So my colleague John has it integrated with Node-RED, and you basically have to create all these nodes, and this looks a little tricky right now, but there's an IBM Cloud service called Node-RED that you can use, and here he's using speech to text. I don't have this set up right now, but if anyone ever needs help with this, or if you're interested in getting this involved with Node-RED, basically Node-RED allows you to use flow-based programming. So you're not technically writing like code, you're basically using these blocks called nodes. And let's see, I want to show you this full picture. Yeah, so you're using all these blocks called nodes, and you're wiring them up together. So for example, this is the Watson Assistant node. I know this looks a little bit overwhelming, but you're going to, you know, use some of these services called like text-to-speech. Here, you can put in your API keys for those services. And at the end, he created this thing called the dashboard. And so he created this whole like dashboard where he can take the data and, you know, build these gauges. He built this whole dashboard on chat history. And if you click on this button, it lets you speak to the chatbot. And so there's a speech to text way you can interact with this chatbot. So yeah, feel free to check out all of these examples. I'm happy to help you guys if you're specifically interested in chatbots, specifically interested in Node-RED, anything interested in this space, I'm happy to help you. If you have any questions, feel free to just, you know, tag me in your in this chat. I have some other really great resources for chatbots. So for example, build a pizza ordering bot, create like an online store. So feel free to check some of those out. And then also if you're interested in Node-RED, there's some of those services as well. So yeah, definitely check out a lot of these resources and feel free to tag me. But I think that's all I have for today. I think Svetlana and Patrick are going to now share some other services that you can check out as well. So let me just stop sharing for now, and then feel free to ping me with any questions. Yep.
Thank you, Pooja, very much. Anybody has questions for Pooja? No? Okay, let me share my screen. So I will talk a little bit about Watson visual recognition, if I can find it here. Where is it? And as usual, I don't see it. Okay, just a second. I have too many windows open. Oh, here it is. Okay, so Pooja already showed you how to create IBM Cloud account, right? Or at least you have the link to do that. And once you have an IBM Cloud account, you can create an account for IBM Watson Studio. I think it's a separate account, but you can have a free account. And then you create a project inside the Watson Studio, and inside the project, so here I have this project Introduction to Deep Learning. And IBM Cloud, you also need to create this visual recognition service, I think. So, yeah, under services, there are various services. Watson services. Anyway, so I'm going to talk today about visual recognition and what does it mean. Yeah, so here I have a visual recognition service. If you don't have one, you can create one. And what does it mean to have a visual recognition service? That's a way for your program to learn to recognize certain images. And how is it usually done? Well, you know, when there is a young child, in the beginning, of course, a child knows nothing, but then slowly they see various images and they are told what they are, and they learn to recognize images. So as you know, the brain consists of those little cells called neurons, and neurons have connections. And it is believed that those connections between neurons is the mechanism how to retain memories. So this inspired some machine learning models back in the 1950s, 1960s. That's when a kind of machine learning called neural networks were first created. And since then, they've been more and less popular a few times. And currently, they are extremely popular due to several factors, such as very good hardware available now with GPUs, etc., and more advanced algorithms. So neural networks in general are now, yeah, they consist of neurons and connections between them. Neurons are just nodes in the neural network, and then there are connections, and each connection has an associated weight, which is just a real number. And those real numbers usually are initialized with small random numbers, but then they get, during training, the data is applied. So you have to have a lot of data and with inputs and outputs that you want to get. And you apply this data to your model and you train it. And after a while, those weights get modified so that the model learns to recognize those and to give correct predictions. That's on a very high level explanation of what visual recognition is. Of course, it's not as good as people's visual recognition. And so anyway, let me show you here how to easily create it in your Watson Studio, and then we can talk about its drawbacks and advantages. So this usually, I think most people probably create neural networks using some kind of coding, for example, Python coding. But here with Watson Visual Recognition, you don't have to write any code to build a model, which is very nice. So once I have a project here, I just call click this add to project, and I can add to project various kinds of items, various kinds of asset types. So in particular here, I have visual recognition. So if you want to write your Python code, you can actually add a notebook, which is a Jupyter notebook. In addition, if you just have regular data, structured data, you can try Auto AI. So Auto AI will create a whole data pipeline for you automatically. You don't need to do much. And there is model of law that would allow you to do a lot of machine learning more or less graphically. And if you want to use that, I think you can later and I can help you to do that. But right now we'll talk about visual recognition because this is something that you may want to use in your applications. So for visual recognition model, you can create, there are pre-built models that already are trained, and you can just test it on a certain image and see how well it works. Maybe we should try to test one of those at some point. Okay, let's try to test it maybe and see what happens. I have no idea what will happen. So here is the model, and there is a test tab. And then here I have this, okay. Sorry, I need to move this, okay. Now I need to find some data. Okay, so I click this browse here, and I can take this image. I tried to find some images. Just I went outside to see if I could quickly build a classifier that would recognize dandelion flowers. Let's see what does it say. Okay, it says it's yellow. Yes, it's a plant. I agree. It's herb. Well, possibly flower. Oh, dandelion. Yeah, see, it recognized dandelion. Very good. This is a model that you can just take and use this code. See, there are code snippets in various languages, like in Java or in Node or in Python or Ruby. So you can use those code snippets to integrate the model into your application, and it will. That's a simple model that is already pre-built. In addition, you can train your own model, and it will not. Usually, training deep learning models requires a lot of data and a lot of time. But with this visual recognition service, you actually don't need that much time and not too much data, because it is so-called transfer learning, where the model already knows how to recognize certain features of an image, and it just retrains the last few layers of the neural network. So let me, so there is some data that you can find. I will share the link in a few minutes. So it's my colleague, Patrick actually helped me to find this data. My colleague John Walicki created this data about coffee and donuts. So let's call the model coffee donuts. Okay, and then, so I already loaded some data here in, so the images are in those zip files, and using this button here, if you can see, with 0100, this is a button to load the data. It lets me browse on my and load the data. So let's just, oh, mine is here, okay. If we load some data, we'll see how it works. So I click on, no, wait a minute. Okay, maybe I should click on plus here. No, okay, then I need to click on this one and add to model. Okay, so I'm using this, and it automatically loads those pictures of donuts. And then I will load this one as another class, and so there will be a class with coffee mugs and another one with coffee bags. Okay, so they're almost done. So you have to have at least 10 images for each class. If you want to get a really good model, you probably need many more images. But of course, the more images you have, the longer it will take to train. So once I have those images here in my class, I just click this train model, and it will build a model for me. But it can take some time. So maybe we should not spend all this time waiting for it to train. Or maybe while it trains, I can tell you a little story. So at one presentation I attended late last year, they decided to build a model to recognize dogs and cats, but in a very interesting way. So they took all white cats images and black dogs images, and they built a model using those. And then they decided to put this model on a white dog. How do you think it was classified? Any ideas? Well, surprisingly, the white dog was classified as a cat. That means that because the model, the way it learns is very different from how people learn. And we don't really know exactly which features it picks up to distinguish those different classes. So it is very important to make sure, if you want to have good predictions, that your data is kind of complete. Consider all possible cases for your data, in your data, so that there is no bias, because it's basically a bias. They introduce the color bias. All the cats were one color, all the dogs another color, and then the color has become the main predictor of the, of course, not right. Okay, well, this is still training, so let's maybe go to my other models that I built previously, and we can see how it works. So as I mentioned, I built a model today to try to identify various, whether a picture has dandelions in it or not. And wait, where is my, oh, it's here. Yeah, so here is my model. I forgot to rename it, so it got the default name. So this is a model that I built earlier today to classify what is, whether a picture has dandelions or not. And if browse, so if I take this one had some dandelions. Yeah, see, it has dandelions with 82% accuracy. Okay, so the point is that this Watson Visual Recognition service allows you very easily build models without any programming. And then it also gives you those code snippets to help you integrate your model predictions into your application with various languages. Any questions so far?
Yeah, no questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Yeah, so I could talk about machine learning, etc., for a very long time, but the problem with machine learning, of course, you have to have a lot of data, and I'm not sure if you would in such short time period. And so I don't know how useful it is in this context of this hackathon, but in general, machine learning is now very popular. I highly recommend everyone to learn more about it. And there are, of course, many different classes to learn about machine learning. And do let me know if you have any questions. I am on Slack, so good luck in your hackathon. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Svetlana. And then once you stop sharing your screen, I will share mine. And thank you. Show you what we have that's completely free, does not require you to create an IBM Cloud account. It's a set of open source microservices. And if you don't know what a microservice is, in essence, a microservice is like an application that you can run in your local environment, you can run it in the cloud. And that microservice exposes an API, and that API any developer can access, right? Using, depending of course on the type of API, but you can implement your applications in Java, in Node.js, in Python, if you would like to. And the microservices that we have developed and that we have open sourced and published on GitHub, they use what's called a REST API. And then the one thing that you should know about this API is it's programming language agnostic, right? So no matter what programming language you use, as long as you can use it to call this microservice, which is running again either on your local machine or on the cloud, you will be able to leverage those services. And on the web page that I'm going to show you, we have a fairly large selection of those services, right? We have services that can detect objects, just like Svetlana was showing you just now with the Watson visual recognition services. But we also have a microservice that can describe the content of an image, right? It will generate a text, a sentence that will describe what you are seeing. We have models that can identify sounds. So if you upload, for example, a WAV file, it would tell you whether there's a siren, whether there was a dog barking, anything that might be of interest. And then we have, of course, models that can deal with text. But let's take a look at the marketplace that we have. So if you click on this link here, and the link to this GitHub repository that I'm using here is in the chat in Slack. So if you open up that link, you will find the link to the Model Asset Exchange, which is what I'm showing you here. And you can see on the left-hand side, since we have at this point 29 different models that can be used to do certain things, right? We have a filter on the left-hand side. For example, if you're interested in all the models or microservices that can operate on images, right? We just select image classification, and then we can see that out of the 29 services that we have, 7 of them can look at an image and tell us something about it, right? And the object detector service is what I'm going to use in my demo here today. Very similar to what Svetlana was showing, but for example, the image segmenter is also very interesting because the object detector itself is going to tell you, for example, there is a dog in the image or a person, right? But the image segmenter will tell you for every pixel in the image what it belongs to, right? So if you want to analyze exactly where in an image, for example, a person is, using this microservice, you will be able to get this information and then use it for whatever use case scenario you have in mind. So let's drill down on the object detector here, just to give you an idea what you can see. What's common to all the models, on the upper right-hand side, you have a few buttons. If you click on Get This Model, it opens up the GitHub repository where you can find the source code, additional information. So if you want to customize it, you're free to do so. So it's all published under an open source license. So whatever changes you make, you can keep. You don't have to contribute this back to anybody else. So this gives you a lot of flexibility, right? Because this model, when you have the source code, is like a white box, right? And you can debug it, you can extend it to meet exactly the needs that you have. If you click on this Try the API link, I'm going to do that in a second, you will be able to test this service because we have an instance deployed on the IBM Cloud. And if you click on the link, you will be able to see what we call the endpoints that then your application can invoke to communicate with that service. And then last but not least, for many of the services that we have a sample application. And like Pooja was mentioning earlier, we also support Node-RED, so that if you're interested in utilizing an object like the object service like the object detector in an IoT scenario, for example, on a Raspberry Pi, you can simply create a flow that then connects to this service that we have and then does the analysis for you. So let's take a look at what the API looks like. If I expand this, so generally speaking, this is called an open API specification. It's a standard that defines what are the in and outputs that a particular service expects when you invoke a particular endpoint. So let's say, for example, we want to find out this object detector service. If you run it locally or on the cloud, what type of objects can it identify, right? So I click here, try it now, execute, and you will see, if I scroll down, a complete list of the different objects or object classes that this service has been trained to recognize. So we can see it's person, a bicycle, a car. if you are trying to identify objects that this model hasn't been trained on, then this service probably is going to give you the wrong answer, right? Or it's not going to give you an answer at all. But let me show you how you can actually test this service. So I'm going to click on the model predict endpoint, which is what your application would invoke. And to click again on try it out, I select the file and I'm going to pick the dog and the human. Just going to accept the defaults here, clicking execute. What happens is this web page is now calling the service that we have, right? And here on the bottom, you can see the response that this service has generated. And we can see, okay, we found, or in this image that I've specified, there were two objects found. One is a person and one is a dog. And in the detection box here, you can see the coordinates within that image that you can then use to visualize the results. Let me actually show you what this looks like in a sample application, because this is what we have provided you with in the lab instructions. So if we go back to the GitHub repository, we can see we provide you with JavaScript code pens that you can use interactively by simply using your browser. So let me just open it up in your window, and I'm going to select the image models. Here you can see, so I can choose from object detector, image caption generator, and the segmenter. So I'm going to keep the object detector. I'm going to select an image, and I'm just going to pick the same one. So we can see this is a woman and her dog. And now I can choose, for example, if I click on this button here, it's going to send out the request with the image to our service. And we can see, okay, now we have visualized where in the image the different objects are located, right? So we can see she is on the left and the dog is on the right. But you can also, of course, now that you have this information, extract this information from the image, right? So you can see that the person is more on the left-hand side, whereas the dog is more on the right-hand side. If you're familiar with code pens, you can simply modify them in your web browser. So if you, for example, want to extend this little demo that we have here, you can simply copy this code pen. Then you have your own copy, and then you can manipulate it if you just want to explore how certain things are done. So this is if you want to, for example, build a web application that takes a picture, for example, in your web browser, and then wants to give you the results of what was found in the image. But then we also have a few sample web applications that you can use. And the one that I'm going to show you is a sample application, again, for the object detector. If we go back to this page here, try the web app, you can see it's a very similar interface, right? I need to choose an image. So let me choose the baby bear this time. I'm going to click submit. This web application is now sending a request to my service. The service is coming back with a response that one object is a person, the other one is a teddy bear with a location. And if we now look at the labels here, we can see, okay, there are two classes found in this image. And now pay attention to this threshold here, right? If I lower the threshold, you can see how what we have seen here changes, right? So now the model thinks with 42% accuracy that there is a bench in the image, right? And you can see as I go lower and lower here with the threshold, we can see that the model that we have is now going to identify things that you as a human can easily identify are false positives, right? So there is no baseball bat in this image, and there's no person here, right? But this is what Svetlana was alluding to. We as humans, when it comes to certain visual tasks, are better than what the models can do today, right? And then because of our experience that we have, just by looking at the image, we can tell, well, this is not a baseball bat, whereas the trained model itself didn't have enough information to make truly a very good bet that this was indeed just a tree here in the background. Now, This demo application, you can download the source code from GitHub, modify it to suit your needs. What we have also added to the resources for this hackathon here is two small tutorial applications that do something very similar, but are a little simpler. So they, for example, don't have the slider, so you can't really change the threshold, but they give you an idea how you would implement something like this, right? And we have instructions for a Python application. So if you have Git installed, you can simply clone the repository, install the requirements, check out the code, and then run the application. So this takes about 2 minutes, and you're up and running in your environment. If you don't have Git installed, you can simply download all of the source code to your machine, and then install the requirements and run it from there. Takes just as long. The only difference is how you're getting access to the source code. And for those of you who are more familiar with JavaScript and Node.js, we also have a very similar sample application. It does essentially the same thing, but was implemented using Node.js and gives you this high-level idea of how do you need to invoke those services that make it possible to, for example, identify objects. Last thing I wanted to show you is something that Pooja has mentioned earlier, the Internet of Things example. So let me open this one up. What I'm using here is a Docker image that we have built. And for those of you who are not familiar with Docker, the fundamental idea is you can use a sandbox environment, an isolated environment in which you can run any type of code, right? And the advantage is that when you run it in this sandbox environment, you are prohibited from interfering with any other applications that are running, for example, on your machine, right? And that makes it extremely portable. And so all I have done in preparation for this presentation here is I have downloaded the Docker image that has everything installed. And now I can start building my flow. So let's say, for example, I want to, actually I can't use my camera because I'm using the webcam here for the recording. So I'm going to pick a file that the user can provide. And then I select from the list of services. So let's say, for example, I want to use the image caption generator node. I'm going to connect these. So this is my input. This is what's going to process it. And then I need to add an output to this flow. And let's say in this case, we want to use the debug node, which is just going to print something to the console here. So I'm going to connect those two nodes. And now I need to just define what is the microservice that I want to use. So I just accept the defaults here, and I'm ready to deploy this flow, right? So let's do this. So now in essence, there's an application running, and I didn't have to write a single line of code, right? And then what this application now does is, if I select the file, and let's pick the jockey, you can see it's now invoking the service, and we can see the message that the model that we've been using, it says or thinks that this is a man riding on the back of a brown horse. Now, of course, let's make sure that this is indeed the case. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add one more node to the to my flow here, and that node is going to display the image. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the size so that's more easily viewable. Deploying my changes, and if I do the same thing again, we can now see the image that we've been processing. Now this is, as you can see, a very simple example, right? So what I have done is I have combined two of those services that we have. So what happens in this flow here is, and let me deploy, actually I don't need to deploy it. What happens here is I can either specify an input file or I can use the camera. The file is then going to be sent to the object detector service, which is going to figure out, okay, what's in the image. And then we have a box that extracts the information and will display it on the canvas here. And then we have the second service, the image caption generator service here, which is then going to describe what the content of the image is. So let me clear the output and then run this flow. Go back here, file inject. Let's use the baby bear again. So you can see how this is now working. It's waiting for the response from the service. And now if we scroll to the right here, we can actually see the preview, right? So we can see what we've seen before. There's a person in the image, there's a bear in the image, and we can see where they are. And if we look at the output here, we can see it's a man sitting on a bench with a dog. So very similar to what we had seen before in the application. But again, we didn't have to write a single line of code to make this working. And something like this you can deploy on a Raspberry Pi. You can deploy this on a drone, for example, right? So it is very versatile and will work as long as you have connectivity to the service that's running, again, either on one of your local machines or on the cloud, so that the device that's capturing the image or the video can send the information to that service. So that's all I really wanted to show you here. Let's just open it up for any questions that you might have. So in the repository itself, you can see we have a list of all the prerequisites that you have to have installed on your machine. And then you have the instructions on how to go about running the example. And then depending, of course, what programming language or environment you're interested in, you can just pick one of the many options that we have to get started. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If there are no questions, then I'm going to hand it back to Pooja for, I guess, some closing remarks.
Yep. So thank you so much, Patrick. That was actually really insightful. I wanted to talk about, the last few things I wanted to talk about is, hold on, let's see. So I wanted to show you all, I'm going to share my screen again. So I know you guys are all doing a teen hackathon right now, but I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about a hackathon that IBM is sponsoring. And it's an IBM-based hackathon, and it's called Call for Code. The one caveat with this hackathon is that you have to be 18 or older to enter. But if you are 18 or older, I would highly suggest taking a look at Call for Code as well. It's a really wonderful hackathon because it's actually allows you to build for solutions that fight back in global scales. So for example, last year our theme was disaster recovery, and this year our theme is climate change, and also we have a COVID-19 challenge. So you know, definitely take a look at Call for Code. You can, you know, submit, if you you can submit maybe the solution that you built today or through this teen hackathon for Call for Code, and your team actually gets a chance to you know, if you win this hackathon, you get a chance, IBM will help you and your team deploy this project throughout the world, and they'll actually give you like around $200,000 to make this your project go worldwide. So definitely take a look at this, but you do have to be 18 or older to enter. So let me just, I'm gonna type this into the chat real quick. Where's the chat? Not right here. So what is, all right. So, and then finally, I wanted to talk to you guys about, you know, this fun app that Patrick has shared with us. This is an internal app that someone has built. I know during this time, things can be really tricky, but one app idea that someone has built is basically having I'm not going to show this video, but definitely take a look at this app. It's called Choirless, and it allows people to sing together and play music together through technology. So a lot of times when you're on a video chat, audio can kind of get jumbled up, but with Wireless, which is an app that someone actually built for the Call for Code, I think hackathon, is allows you to kind of play music together. So we just wanted to share some things that would inspire you all. So feel free to take a look at some of our resources, and I think we're all available on the chat, so on the Slack channel. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'm going to share this Slack channel again. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on the IBM channel. I think myself, Svetlana, I think Patrick, we might need to invite you on this, and then one more advocate, Mary, I think she's on the chat right now, is all on. So feel free to ping us if you have any questions and take a look at some of the resources that we mentioned today. And so we posted the Max, the code AI code pattern that Patrick mentioned, as well as a visual recognition example as well. So yeah, does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay. Yeah, and that's all I have for today. Thank you all. I hope this was insightful. Does anyone have any last final remarks on anything?